Alright, good morning. It's that time again when I don't have reception, even though today I actually did download a few shiurim, but then I decided I have to talk. I haven't made a video in quite some time, which I didn't really realize, of course, because it's been Yontiv, and it's not really time to make videos then. Even Chol HaMoed could make videos, but I wasn't... It's interesting, I really wasn't inspired to make any videos, and now I feel somewhat inspired, listening to the radio a lot on my drive to work, thinking about certain, the timeless element of our holidays, that we can always come back every year to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, year and year again. And while maybe everything else around us is changing, there's certain things that don't change, and we can hold on to. And what that means in our lives and everything. There's a lot of things I want to talk about today. A lot of things, and I really don't have that much time. I only have about 15 minutes, and although it's going to take longer than that for me to get to work, I hope I get there in time. Maybe have a little kvitzas at derech. I was listening to the radio, I was listening to NPR, and I was listening to just now Glenn Beck, and I'm kind of happy that I'm running a little late, that I was able to listen to Glenn Beck, because the things he spoke about were absolutely incredible. If you have a chance to listen, he was talking about tznius, about buying modest clothes for your daughters, and what a challenge it is. Reminds me, Rabbi Fishbane tells a story, and this we're talking about back in the 40s and 50s, maybe even earlier in the 30s, how difficult it was to buy tznius clothes, to buy modest clothes for his sisters. And what does that mean exactly? What is, in those days, how difficult it was, and what the challenge is today? And yet he's Glenn Beck now, and he spoke about growing up in Chicago and how buying clothes was the most painful experience. And then they come to New York, his sisters, they go to Beis Yaakov in New York, and their friends are like, oh, let's go clothes shopping, and they're like, what? Like, that's the most painful thing I could think of doing. Go clothes shopping? Seriously? And then they're like, I see you have plenty of clothes. What do you need more clothes? And the mother said, well, there's emotional needs, And these are the type of stories what Glenn Beck was talking about. And this is not all he's talking about, but he's talking about, seeing a commercial for Emirates Airlines. How, no, the women were not wearing hijab or certainly not burqas, but everyone was dressed what we would call tznius. And he said even to the point where there was someone at the beach and they went wearing a robe and running toward the beach with a robe on. And Glenn Beck said, he called his son over and he's like, I want you to see this. I want you to notice this. He said, most people just wouldn't notice this. And he said, America used to be the Puritans that everyone made fun of, and now we're not. And what does that mean? And here you have... and still I think America is still a little bit more religious and puritanical than Europe, than countries like Israel, places like that. But we could do a lot better. And, I think of Victor Miller, his reflections on the book of Jonah, how he said, Jonah was afraid that the people of Nineveh would do tshuva, would repent, and the Israelites would not, and that's what happened. And he was very upset about that. And the lesson there is that Rabbi Miller says, we as Orthodox Jews, or as Jews in general, really, although go knock your head against that wall with the non-Orthodox Jews, for the most part, with a few very fine exceptions that I have a lot of respect for, whether it's people who watch this show or even other people, people like what's the guy's name? Dennis Prager, who I might not agree with everything he has to say, or even, Mark Levin and so forth. There are exceptions to these rules, but in general, the secular Jewish society is pretty difficult to talk about. I'm not going to talk about that right now. That's not my point. But Rabbi Miller said we have to be at least as good as the best Gentiles. Don't mean that to be disrespectful against Gentiles. Don't get me wrong. But if we have a mission, but every religious person probably feels, Muslims feel that way, Christians feel that way. I don't think there's any real issue with saying something like that. I don't think that should be offensive necessarily. I don't know, maybe other people disagree with me. Of course, not all Christians, but I'm saying, like a pious born-again Christian. I mean, I read a book about dynamic African-American churches, and, the discussions of the... it was written by an African-American pastor, but he was discussing the sociology of the different types of churches, and, you have this concept of being in the world but not of the world, which it's not only in African-American churches, it just happened to be that was the book I was reading, but although you do hear these different approaches in the different cultures and the different Christian cultures that exist, and I find these things fascinating and very interesting. So I don't think that's necessarily an offensive thing to say that a Jew should feel he should be at least as good as the best Gentile. I don't think that's an insult against Gentiles. I don't know, maybe other people disagree, but I certainly think that a lot of Jews have what to learn from pious Gentiles, both Christians and Muslims, and even, I don't mean Judaism has what to learn, but our sages do say, Torah among the nations don't believe it, but wisdom among the nations believe it. And there is certainly a lot of wisdom among the nations, and even among other religions, that we can take something from. It's not cultural appropriation, really. It's really reclaiming things that were originally Jewish, for the most part, that I've seen, what I can understand. I mean, it's shocking that here we're the people who brought the Bible to the world, and yet there are other people who in certain cases are doing it a lot better than we are. I don't mean than the Orthodox, but I mean than the Jewish community in general, and so that's what Jonah was afraid of. This is what, even though I went to a co-ed school, but Rabbi Miller, someone asked him, what do you say to an Orthodox Jew who wants to send their children to a co-ed school? And that's his answer. He says, we have to be at least as good as the best Gentiles. Meaning, are there any Gentiles in the world that don't have co-ed schools? Sure. I mean, my grandmother, who's Jewish and frum, she should be well. She grew up going to public school that was only girls. And that's how things were in those days. And in New York, not talking about out in the woods somewhere, So there is that aspect, but I don't, the problem is that so many Jews don't even recognize that is better, that is our own religion, meaning that others have appropriated, and we're glad about that, because our job is to be a light unto the nations. And, as much as Jews have suffered historically under people who claim to be Christians or claim to be Muslims, the fact of the matter is the central ideas of Christianity and Islam our Jewish ideas, and they have spread through the world and essentially fulfilled our mission of being a light unto the nations, even to the point where religions that we might look at as essentially pagan, because of the influence of Christianity and Islam, have dropped some of their more egregious practices and expunged them from their culture. You know, meaning the British and one force that really did this in the world was the British Empire. But there's a story I heard, it was on Prager University, a video about extolling the virtues of Britain and of British imperialism, and how British imperialism has really made the world a much better place in a certain sense, because, and eventually it led to letting, you know, the independence of and America really inspired that. So it's really America. I mean, all of these things are all part of God's plan, you know. But and Maimonides says that about Christianity and Islam, and I think we can say that about many other things throughout history, whether religions or political movements and so forth, how God's plans have been, you know, brought about even in ways that we might find painful or abhorrent even. Now, what they said in this one video was that, you know, in India, widows used to throw themselves on their husband's funeral pyre and commit suicide, and sometimes they're forced to do so. And this was a practice in many Eastern cultures, and perhaps still is today in certain small pockets, but for the most part it's gone. And for the most part, people who are Hindus and who are proud of their Hindu heritage and religion are happy that a lot of these practices have disappeared. I would say for the most part. I mean, it was the same thing in Judaism. To be honest, I mean, I think our sages are happy that we don't, even though the Torah tells us that breaking Shabbos is a capital offense, I think our sages were happy when society changed to the point where that was no longer possible and no longer enforceable. And yes, they wanted us to keep Shabbos, but you know, and the same thing with other capital offenses. I mean, there are obvious ones that people are, you know, they're big political issues. But I think, you know, it's pretty obvious that our society should be happy that we're not executing people for committing certain sins as much as we would like, you know, maybe ourselves to stop doing those sins, or as much as we would like others to stop doing those sins. We're not looking to be executing people for doing this. So our society has changed over time. Now that doesn't mean that it's hefker. It's the same thing we talk about, you know, the discussion of the American Constitution being a living and breathing document. And yes, there are ways to change the Constitution, but they're very, very difficult. And it's not just whatever you want. It's not just by fiat of the courts. And so too in our religion and similar things. There are other things we can talk about. Certain things do change over time. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you know, Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. If Sukkot falls on Shabbos, we don't take the lulav. Things have changed over time, but we needed a Sanhedrin. We don't have that authority today, and so those things, we don't currently have the power to change one way or the other in certain things. But time changes, things change over time. And so the British approached the Hindu culture and said, we totally respect, they said, kind of that wry British sarcastic way. They said, we British, we respect your culture, and that you have a custom of burning widows, but we also have a custom of hanging men who murder widows. And so we have our customs, and you have your customs, and we'll see which one wins. And they're not saying necessarily by government fiat you have to give up your religion, although they might have missionaries who might be encouraging people to do so, but that's within their right as well on both sides, and it's within their right not to accept it and so forth. But we're not telling you not necessarily telling you have to give up your whole religion, and we're not necessarily telling you have to give up this practice, but there are consequences. And so too, if someone, let's say, you have these Neo-Karaites, and so let's say someone wants to be a Neo-Sadducee, and they're like, well, I go solo scriptura, and I'm going to start executing various sinners and take it into my hands to handle these issues. Set up a court, a biblical style court, and start executing criminals. And the governments that exist are like, all right, you do that, you're gonna kill someone, we're gonna kill you back, or at least throw you in jail for the rest of your life. And they're right, I mean, I don't personally believe, there's a particular story where someone was arrested and there's claims of attempted murder or plans of attempted murder or something within our own community. I don't personally believe that it's true, and I believe that it's exaggerated. We know Preet Bharara was a piece of garbage, and he had it in for anyone who was conservative, whether politically or religious. We see what he did to Dinesh D'Souza. We see how he persecuted the Hasidic community in Bloomingburg because they voted for Trump, really. That's why he attacked them, and yet he ignored the actual voter fraud that took place from the rural heritage side. I mean, everything Mr. Lamb did and he pled guilty for, he did openly because he didn't think he was really breaking the law. And they're telling him, well, there's some technicality. But meanwhile, it was probably Bill Herman, and why the FBI hasn't been on Bill Herman's case, but Bill Herman tried to cover it up, and he has the chutzpah, he's running for re-election again, who actually stole that election by bringing in people who had moved away. I saw with my own eyes. And the miscarriage of justice is just so shocking. Anyway, there are a lot of other things I have to talk about today. There's a lot of important things I have to talk about. I'm trying to think about how to talk about them in a sensitive way. I'm here at work now. I'm only going to be here for a short time because I have a very important job interview. Everyone, please pray for me that whatever God's will is concerning this job interview, God's will should be done. It's a job that would be very good for me in certain ways, but I have to think about other considerations. But still, I think it's at least worthwhile for me to go to this interview, even though I'm having somewhat of a loss, missing out on a bit of work today with permission. So we're gonna see. Let's see what happens with that. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Please like, share, and subscribe. I have a lot of other things to talk about today, very important things. Things I don't know how to address. that I don't have the courage really to address. And so maybe someone might be watching this video. I don't know. I found out something about someone who I don't know if he watches the videos or not. I heard something about someone. I don't know if it's true or not, and I really don't care whether it's true or not. I'm more hurt that this person perhaps was dishonest with me about this subject, but I still love and care about and respect this person. I understand why they felt the need to perhaps be dishonest, if it's even true, which I don't even know if it's true. If you're watching, you might know what I'm talking about. Someone who lives in a different state. So if you're in New York, you're off the hook. All right, God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I look forward to more discussions on these issues and other issues. All right, and that's something I'm probably going to talk about. All right.